Hi, my name is Chris Cowan, and my author is Walt Whitman, aka the Great Poet, the Good Great Poet. Now, Walt Whitman is right there. Now, Walt Whitman was a poet in the 1800s. He was born in New York on Long Island, May 31st of 1819. He grew up in Brooklyn, and he grew up in sort of a humble home, and he was never received a formal education. He taught himself to read and write, and he taught himself so well that he learned to love it so much that he made a career out of it. He started off at the age of 17 as a school teacher, then later transferred into journalism. And in 1841, he founded a weekly newspaper in Brooklyn. Later, he moved to New Orleans for a short bit in 1848 to become the editor of the New Orleans Crescent. Soon after he moved back to Brooklyn, he founded the Brooklyn Freeman, an equality newspaper. Now, Walt Whitman was a kind of a diamond in the rough. He had a lot of controversial views at the time in 1800s. He was very big on equality, not just for races, but for women and sexual orientation and to anyone, honestly. He called himself the Bard of Democracy, as in like stretching out freedoms to everyone. He was suspected to be homosexual, and he was proud of this. And at the time in 1800s, that was very uncommon. Nowadays, it's you see it all the time. Like everyone is proud of who they are. That was not the case back in 1800s. And today, equality groups like the LGBT idolize him for his bravery, for being proud of who he was, even in times like that. Now, he wrote a lot of famous work, but his most famous work was Leaves of Grass. You can see. Now, Leaves of Grass was published in 1855. He published it himself, and he was inspired by all of his visitations around the American frontier, and it talked about equality, nature, loving, nurturing, and Leaves of Grass was compiled of almost 300 poems. That's a lot of poems for one book. And it also had 7 editions. Walt Whitman loved revising and making things better. And in 1855, America was not on the same level of progression as Walt Whitman was. So the large part of America hated Leaves of Grass for that. It wasn't until later in Walt Whitman's life that people began to appreciate his work. Now, nowadays, he's considered one of the best American poets of all time. That was not the case back in 1800s. Now, not only did he write Leaves of Grass, he wrote a good deal of poems on the Civil War. His first Civil War book was called Drum Taps. You can see it right there. Yeah. And he was inspired by his charity work for wounded Union soldiers when he lived in Washington, D.C., working as a clerk. Now, he was inspired so much about what the soldiers endured that he wrote Drum Taps, and he idolized the ideas of the North. And even in Drum Taps, he wrote a poem as an eulogy for Abraham Lincoln. And he even idolized Lincoln so much that he wrote another poem called "Oh Captain, My Captain." Now, Walt Whitman was like I said, one of the most famous and respected poets of America of all time, not just the 1800s. Now, Walt Whitman did a lot of really, really fine work, but it wasn't just about his literary work that made him so famous. It was his views of equal rights. Like I said, in 1800s, that was not huge and not really smiled upon to kind of go against the normal. Now, Walt Whitman today is now praised for that, and I do think that his legacy will live on, not only through his literary work, but through his works in equality. And, well, that's Walt Whitman.